Alrighty, here we go. Number one. Alright, so the first thing I would say that needs fixed about this is, I would say declutter. Way too much information. I'm not sure where to go. Technically, we refer to this as a visual hierarchy problem. So please, whoever created this website, look up visual hierarchy. I'm really not sure where I should look first. Next up here, I would say the issue here, I'm going to say contrast. I think you could definitely make your elements stick out a little bit more. I have my suspicions of whether or not this would even pass what's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Contrast, like minimum contrast ratios. And a quick way that we can test this out is we can go ahead over here and notice it has the little orange exclamation point that says 3.94. It does not pass. It needs to be at least 4.5. All right, so there are extensions you can get that that you can ensure this, especially in your design software too, like Figma and Adobe XD. Let me go ahead and I will just close these out. Next up is this one. Okay, so I kind of like the interesting illustration, although I don't know about the top one. We could probably get away with getting rid of this top illustration, and then that would greatly simplify this hero section at least. That's what I'm going to say here. I think this could be improved by removing this top graphic and give it more kind of a semblance of a structured layout with a left column and a right column, where the information, or the illustration rather, is just kind of delegated in this right column. I think it would really simplify things to a decent degree. Next up. All right. Some of these aren't really too bad here. I'm going to say, upon first glance, it's pretty good up here, actually. This is actually pretty solid. I would, All right, scrolling down, the first major issue I'm going to point out is right here. Not enough white space inside of this inner container, and the way you've chosen to lay these elements out right here, where they kind of just fall off into the left, you want to push those over and make sure the check marks are all kind of aligned up without having overflow here with the actual text elements. So padding inside and fix this area here. Also more white space beneath the Learn More button. It's a little bit of a run-on situation here. Next up, build a SaaS with React in Next.js. I'm going to say a real quick and easy way to get things aligned up in more of a structured layout. Whenever you have two columns, I'm never a fan of having the column with the text, like the headline, sub-headline, and call to action. I'm never a fan of them being centered like this. Left align all this content right here, and it's going to flow a lot better, especially against the edge of this photograph right here. Next up, there's an issue significantly, I would say, with contrast right here, and also alignment. Notice how we have a column here, and then you kind of indented this. That's a no-no, and it's also right aligned. So this is right aligned, this is left aligned, throws off the flow. Get all these left aligned, probably right here where the sign up starts, and also make them dark. There's no way this passes the color contrast guidelines, especially this small one. Sometimes you can't check, but I can guarantee you the contrast is lacking here. So contrast and alignment with this one. All right. This looks like an interesting element. This was an easy one. You made it easy on me, because never put a hamburger menu on a desktop. It's completely unneeded. Look at all the space you have here. You can put your contacts, your blog, case studies, playground, series, all that stuff can go right here on this section. Next up, custom website development. All right, it's a lack of typographic visual hierarchy. While this is larger than this text, this is a headline and a subheadline right here. You can definitely make this bold. Next up, you're also not giving anybody a direction. There's no call to action. There's no scroll indicator. There's no button. Don't leave people hanging, and don't just allow them to rely on these buttons up here in order to navigate. Next up, this one, very interesting. I like that animation up here. Looking to see if there's anything that's too blatantly incorrect. Okay, so on this page alone, I would say I would certainly take this whole line right here in the middle and just put the margin top Negative 4 M. Nope, that's a little bit too much. Maybe about 2.5 M or about 2.2 M units. All right, so now we have a little bit better spacing. There was too much white space beneath it. This one looks a little bit more organized as compared to this one where there's kind of an uneven amount of white space here. Next up, all right, check SpaceX rockets and launches. Starship launch, next launch, get past launches. Okay, so right here I would say it's just the structure of this doesn't really make sense in terms of your information architecture here. You just have a bunch of buttons. You could probably take this information like a Starship launch or when the next launch is and just put that right here. Don't require people to click to access that information. This is the website. You have all this space to do it. There's no reason just to have a big full screen navigation when that information could be provided right here, especially when it's just a tiny bit of amount of information. Next up, empowering students to achieve more. All right, learn with passion to live with purpose, explore now. All right, I'm gonna say, okay, I like the navigation. It's pretty simple up here. Get rid of this weird white underline from the achieve. It just doesn't work well. It looks like you're kind of crossing it off. And also, when you're talking about something positive like achieving more, I wouldn't use this reddish color because usually it just emits danger and warning. So you don't want two paradoxical concepts at play here. So I would change that as well. And then also figure out a way, especially on a large desktop resolution, to fill out more of the white space. So we can increase the size of this and try to make use of the layout a little bit more. Next up, all right, big empty white space here. Something needs to go here like an illustration. It's just leaving me just desiring to have something more right here. So I would definitely improve that. Maybe make this slightly darker to increase that visual hierarchy between these three elements. Never a fan of just having social links for call to action buttons. You have to give them somewhere else to really go outside of just these secondary elements right here, like your GitHub, your LinkedIn, and things like that. So give them an actual button, a call to action. That could be something as simple as like you're take them right to your portfolio, or take them right to the skills section, or try to get them to contact you. Next up here, stay hungry, stay foolish. All right, so we have a lot of issues here. This up here, first of all, if it's a button, you want to make sure you change the cursor to pointer. Also, it's misaligned and it's also way too large. Also, I wouldn't go to 100% fluid, especially on a 4K. Bring things in eventually. And you're going to need to work on this section here because this really doesn't tell me much about what exactly this website is about. Even if it's your portfolio, it's still kind of just confusing. So you're going to need to work on quite a bit here in this example. All right, right here. So you're making me work. I really don't feel like having to work, and people might not like this. It's an interesting, witty, creative take on having a portfolio, but for me personally, I don't want to have to think. I want access to everything, and that's how most people are, unfortunately, as well. So you can include this as a part of an interesting portfolio example, but your actual portfolio needs to adhere to the standards. Next up here, I would say add to Chrome for free. It's a nice, pretty, I would probably make this white by default. That way it stands out a lot more. Look at this versus that. So it's going to grab the eye a lot more than just this outline version. This all looks pretty solid though from this standpoint. So that was just one tiny little thing. A lack of alignment. So we have this logo, which is nicely vertically aligned in the center here based on this white space. But then this is all the way down here, very low. And it just throws off the flow of the layout. These should be up here in line with this section right here. Also, this is much to be desired. Get that bold, get that a lot bigger if this is all you're gonna have. And really, you don't need to designate this much height just for a hero section that only has this right here, this small headline. Next up after this, all right, so just taking a look at this small example here. It's a little bit hard to see exactly what is happening. Yeah, you know what? Unfortunately, because it's a Behance, not a live website, I'm gonna have to skip that one. This one, clearly an issue with just positioning. Leaving all this space over here is a big no-no. If you're gonna have like a fixed width container, put that in the center. All right. After that, I would say your call to action kind of gets lost right here with this sub headline, which is too small of text. So you're going to want to beef up, make the call to action much more obvious, and also probably rethink your alignment here because this is only slightly indented from where this starts. But yeah, the biggest thing is going to get everything centered up. Next up in this section is a little bit strange with this underline, how it's offset. It's not exactly in the middle of portfolio, so that's kind of throwing me off, although that's not a huge deal. Good headline, good sub headline, and good call to action here. I like that. But yeah, I would say just fix that as the only thing that I'm really noticing here. Get this aligned here in the center, and maybe a little bit more white space between the actual links, and give them a hover state as well. Next up here, all right, so this is going to be an issue probably with both scale and alignment and a lack of white space up here. So when you have a large desktop like this, as I'm at 4K maximized out, you want to take this content and you want to make use of your space as much as possible so you don't have huge areas of empty white space like here. So what you would do in your CSS at least is maybe use the grid in order to align this vertically so it's like right here based on the height of the viewport. Right here as well, scale issue like I mentioned, you're going to beef up the size of that considerably, especially because you have a lot of room here given this resolution. Next up here, introducing Gratitude Genie, a conversational everyday gratitude journal. I would probably say that this one lacks alignment. It lacks a structure of a layout. Clearly, there's two columns here. We have one right here, and then we have this graphic right here. I would probably just left align this stuff and then take this, get it on Google Play, and then the Apple Store buttons, put them in two columns next to each other and scale them down a little bit more based on what you have here. All right, next one. Again, this is kind of like lacks a semblance of a structured layout. NFT art exhibition. Again, you're gonna if this is all your content's going to be, put that in the middle. Also, the borders, the real high contrast borders, is something we just don't really see anymore, and it just adds unnecessary visual clutter. So get your things simplified much more. All right, right here, brand cliniques. All right, so we have a big no-no right here. This looks like some sort of advertisement, like a banner. Ideally, this would be in HTML because this is just an image. Also, outside of that, we have some typography issues as well. We're using this type right here, and it's pretty condensed and it's hard to read because it's a very thin weight for the font. And also, we have extended kind of letter spacing with a different type, and these two don't really mix well together in terms of typography. So you definitely want to focus on this initial hero section up here. All right, outside of that, this is a clone of Amazon apparently, so I'm not going to screw with that. Again, alignment, biggest issue here. Also, no call to action. Give them a call to action underneath here. This big old empty space, that's a big no-no. So that one was quite easy for me to spot. Right here, I would definitely rethink your nav up here. Okay, first, we had that issue again where we only have 4 links. We have home, recipe book, get, live sites. Those could all be right up here. And then I'm not sure why you're delegating so much, emphasis on these elements right here when you're forcing a user to have to click over here to get to the main meat and bones of this website itself. So get rid of that on desktop. Probably stick to conventions, take your logo, put it to the left, and then put these over here to the right. And then you'll probably still even have room if you scale those down to put those here as well. Or you can just put them like in a different part of the website. Next up after this, all right. So the one thing I kind of don't like about the typewriter effect is if you're going to be shifting all the time between different things, you're just forcing the person to wait. So I would say that's a bad user experience. So I'm just not a fan of that. You can do it in a more limited sense if it's just one word and you're kind of quickly changing the word out. But when it comes to fully changing the headline, I'm not a fan of that. And you're also changing fully the description here. Also, it lacks a call to action of some sort. So give them somewhere to go and make it stand out well. All right, next up, we're halfway finished basically. So let me get over here and get the very next one, which is right here. Okay, so Oh boy, so we have quite an issue in terms of just overall layout structure. Excessive white space between this element right here, these various elements. I'm not sure why. It's just a big column right here. So I'm going to say it's the biggest issue here is just a lack of structure for your layout. Obviously, there's also alignment issues where it says login. This is real close to the logo, this part. You could push this over to the right, especially at least to right here, so that if you're going to have this bar here, you create that nice column for the flow of the layout. And then also down here, this is just too small. It's way too much of an afterthought. So scale all of that up, move it up, and rethink off this main hero section. All right, next up after that. All right, again, not really giving anybody anywhere to go. And also, the biggest one is going to be, the biggest issue is going to be this pattern for the navigation, putting it at the bottom. I didn't know to look there first. I didn't see it. People recognize what they're used to, and they're going to look for a navigation at the top, not at the bottom. So put this up there for sure. Next up after that, we have this one. Again, this is really a monotone approach. It's not really giving me anywhere. You could use color. I would say you don't have to use a bunch of colors, but one color to really make the areas that you want to pop out. I hate using pop out, but that's what I'm going to say. So, if you use a nice color, if you want to emphasize one of these call to actions, like the contact or something, make the background like that vibrant color, make sure the type contrasts well, and I think that would be a lot better as just a way to emphasize the important parts of the website that you want to. Next up after that, all right, not enough going on here, just way too empty. If you're going to have a real minimalistic approach, certainly put some sort of texture in the background. That could be in the form of a photograph, watermark, or an illustration or something simple. Up here, way tucked in the corner, I just saw this. Don't do that. Again, I already talked about this. Put those all up here by default, and also put your name as well to give yourself a nice navigation and a nav bar. After that, all right, can't really see this logo. Inverse that to black so that we can really see it, so that it contrasts well. Next up after that, this sort of gets lost over here. Put more white space between these elements and make sure they contrast more. This is a light background, so you shouldn't use light text. You go black or something that's really black and actually contrast more so. After that, search for anything to rent. This right here is not a very obvious call to action as it pertains to a form element because it lacks a button, it lacks an icon of some sort, and so also I would push it down just a little bit from this subhead and probably make it a little bit bigger, even beef up the border so that it really sticks out. And I would also have a call to action clearly that says search or some other, or find anything, or find homes or whatever. Next up after that, again, on a full 4K fluid or monitor, you want to make sure that you're not using 100% fluid layouts, because this is jarring to have to go all the way over here and then read all of this big, long, couple sentences. So confine things to the middle in a fixed container, get the home right here, and get the end of courses right over here, and it's going to immediately improve this layout, at least on this resolution that I'm looking at things for here. So also, you lack a call to action. Get that call to action. After that, right here, the issue here is clutter. So there's just a lot of stuff happening here in the middle, and you're doing a few things that are adding to that clutter unnecessarily. First of all, your text is all aligned to the center, and also like in this little container, this container doesn't need to be here. It's an unnecessary element, just like this border, this high contrast 1 pixel border, that doesn't need to be there either. What I would suggest you do is go to sites like Dribbble or other design inspiration sites and try to see how they structure different layouts. Good examples, of course, because you can give a lot more space and attention to all these different sections or these elements of about you than what you're doing here, because you're kind of crunching them all in. There's not much white space, and it just makes a lot of clutter. After that, All right, I don't know what's happening here. So that's the biggest issue. Within the first couple seconds, I need to know what the site is about. I don't know why I'm putting an avatar name here. I have no clue. So what you could do, push this down, this whole form, get yourself a good headline and a good sub-headline that informs the user what is happening here. Don't make assumptions. After that, I haven't seen these in a while, these little Vertis background graphics. Okay, we're using an unconventional sort of layout. This gets lost on this resolution because it's always tucked way over here to the right, and I had to look for it. The navigation needs to be obvious. I hate to be a broken record, but honestly, in this context, you only have 4 links. Put them over here. Put your logo over here in a fixed container, and trust me, it's going to serve you much better. I do like the colors and all of that you have here. Oh, interesting. I can create these by clicking. Next up, more white space above this element. This is a little bit condensed up here, just a bit. So I would definitely push things down so I can show you real quickly just how much better it makes it look when you give elements room to breathe. So when I refresh it, we'll see the original, and it just kind of gets it tucked in here. Also, I would work on your leading, which is your line height between these elements. It's pretty close here, but it's between these elements, it's kind of far apart. So you need to have a little bit more balance in this important section right here. Also, I think there's an issue here. So we have this large type, which is kind of like the headline, and then we have these kind of subheads that are above it. But they're kind of styled very similar. Your name and then your title of UI UX designer. So I would want you to emphasize one over the other right here, especially if this one's going to be so small and a thin weight. The contrast has to be higher than what it is, because this would definitely fail. People would have a hard time seeing that the fact that it says UI UX designer. So work on this area right here. Next up, alignment. Again, I'm never a fan of centering elements when there's 2 columns. Everything is pretty well done here, but then you center the call to action here. So put this to the left. Also, you can detect if you're on with media queries, if the person is on a large viewport or resolution. So you can stand to make this larger, because look at all this white space that we have that's unused. Also, all the way over here, it's kind of like a fluid layout. I don't want to have to turn my head this much just to look over here. So get things condensed more, and that would be a good fix. All right, so this button definitely needs work. It's the one thing I think that just is you could definitely improve the most. Probably, I'm not too much of a fan of the gradient. Why? Because look at parts of the gradient. Over here, it does contrast well, this blue versus this desaturated blue. But if you come over here in this purplish area, it doesn't contrast very well. So if you're going to use gradients, make sure all of the colors that are part of that gradient contrast well everywhere based on the background it's sitting on. And also I would get rid of, looks like there's some sort of border around it as well. Also more white space on top of the Let's Chat button to push it away from this stuff right here. Next up over here, this needs work a lot, all right? So we have sort of a semi-aligned center navigation, but it's kind of shifted off to the right. And then you have this element right here that defines kind of like the left portion of the container of this layout. And then over here, which is a bunch of white space in the middle, you have another column, and then you push everything all the way out over here, put this stuff over here. So the issue here is alignment. You need to align things better because right now things are they're cluttered. They're kind of all over the place. There's no structure to the layout, and you give structure to the layout through positioning and alignment. Next up after this, get rid of this background. There's just too much stuff happening. If you're gonna have the typewriter effect, at least make the type a lot bigger than this, because this is just distracting me big time. So that's the number one thing to fix here. Outside of that, all right, so there's a search right here next to the logo, and then underneath here we have, so this navigation should be over here. You have all this room, and you're just extending the height of the navigation or the header here unnecessarily so. Also, these sliders here, there's just big empty spaces. There's no actual type-based content here. So if you're going to have image-based sliders, make sure each one of them will really fit well and flow well with your layout. After this, a lack of white space between these elements, all right, these typographic elements. Look how cluttered this is. Separate those things out much, much, much more. All right, one of these kind of like the other one with the console typing in. I'm not a fan of these for portfolios just because it's extra work on behalf of the user. It's an interesting case study and just being able to work with JavaScript to do these cool sorts of things. But at the end of the day, if it requires, and if you're relying on this to try to get clients or employers to hire you, I wouldn't do this. This could be just like an example of what you can do in terms of JavaScript and cool stuff, but your main site needs to be usable as possible in terms of your portfolio. Next up after this, I would say color is the biggest issue. It's just very drab, like this mid-gray. You want things to be you want them to, I don't want to say pop, but you don't want them to be squashed in terms of your colors into mid-ranges. So make sure you use a white background here. I'm not sure if this is a part of an image or if I can actually change the background color. I might not be able to. If I type in background white, yeah, it's not going to work. But trust me, if we took the background, made it white, this would become 1,000 times better than what it is. Right here, excessive movement, generally not a good thing. It's just a distraction. Subtle movement is okay, but this is too much. Outside of that, your call to action right here, notice how this outline gets lost based on these colors that you're using, and now it's here. You always want things to work no matter what, but I would fill this in by default so that it really sticks out as much as possible and contrasts as much as possible rather than just relying on an outline for your primary call to action. Next up after this, we have Python and data science for everyone. All right, so I would say you should have, with the way you're listing out your content, you could really stand to emphasize a few, maybe a lot more than what you are here. Everything's kind of small, so I kind of naturally want to boost up my browser just to see. So your font size needs to be bigger, and I think you should really emphasize maybe in a main area right in this middle section, one or two projects or tutorials with a lot bigger scale in terms of the type and the thumbnails and such like that. Next up, the thing that I've been immediately drawn to is this outer glow. Ditch that the way you're doing that, the box shadow. I would completely get rid of that. It just makes it not look that good. Also, this type here, it just makes it feel kind of like a game or gamerish. I would definitely tape and change this type as well. Next up over here, get rid of this high contrast border. It just doesn't do anything. It takes attention to itself, and it's just a border, and it shouldn't do that. If you want a border, make them very low contrast. Dark mode here. Looking at this, I improvise user. Okay, all right. Nothing too horrible is happening here, although I would say emphasizing the word user experience right here, it almost looks like a button and it kind of competes. So I would emphasize this perhaps in a lower contrast color or even shade of this background, just making it look like slightly dark. And I think it would work a little bit better and suit you better. And last but not least, send me a message. This is my personal website. All right. Don't like this right here. If you're going to have a quote or a testimonial of some sort, push that down further away from this type because it's screwing up the layout because it's kind of offset here. Yeah, you can push it away and give it a lot of white space and designate its own little section or containerized section specifically for this element. Otherwise, it's just too cluttered the way it is. And then also your navigation's getting lost up here. Put that right here and push this stuff down away from it.